Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at interacting with the environment and specifically objects within that environment. So if we just take a quick look at the project that I have set up here, we can see that I've got a very basic character controller, nothing too spectacular, a few colliders, and we have these bins or trash cans for our American viewers. And when we go through one that's interactable, we have a little icon that pops up that shows us we can interact with it, and if we press our interact key we can see something happens. And the aim of this tutorial is to make this functionality reusable throughout our entire project by making it as generic as possible. And this is going to be one of two parts. The second part, we're going to go on to interacting with doors and traversing around our map using this functionality. So we'll do this one first, and then we'll go into the player transitions between or within our scene in the next tutorial. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all the functionality that's needed to do this, and we'll start recreating it from scratch. Okay, so I've gone and undone all my hard work, so if we go and play this game now, the only thing that I've left is my character controller. As you see, when I go past the bins, I don't get anything and I can't interact with them whatsoever. Just before we start, I do want to give a quick shout out to the creator of the asset pack that I'm using in this tutorial. That is MuchoPixels. You can find him on Instagram and Itch if you want to download this pack for yourself. He's a fantastic pixel artist, make sure you go and check him out. So, we've got to understand the kind of things that we need to make objects interactable. Now, the way that we're going to do this, we're going to use raycasting. And put very simply, what raycasting does, whenever you call the raycast, it will fire basically a line, an invisible line, through the direction that you want it to. And if it hits anything, it'll return that object back to you. So we can then interrogate that object and see if it's one that we're interested in. But to actually get that hit collision, we need to make sure that our objects have a box collider in this, or any type of collider for that matter, but in this instance we're going to be using box collider 2D. So we're going to make sure that anything that's interactable automatically has a box collider. Now, I'll just give you a bit of fair warning here. This tutorial may be a little bit too advanced for some people. I'm going to try and go through and describe everything as well as I can and try and guide you in the right way. But there are a few elements in this that have their own individual tutorials on my channel. So I'll put links to those in the description if you're interested in finding out a little bit more about things like inheritance, abstract classes, and extension methods. So let's start by setting up our character controller while we already have this set. So as you can see, all this is doing is it's accepting a horizontal value, and we're moving our character based on that and setting the animator parameters at the same time. Nothing spectacular. And again, I do have a tutorial on 2D movement if you're interested in that. So what are some of the methods that we're going to need in here? Well, we have our interactable icon, the little finger that you saw whenever we hovered over an interactable object. So we're going to need a way to open this from outside of this script. So we'll just start by creating these. While these are going to be very simple. So these are going to be public void, not capitals, public void, open interactable icon. And we're also going to want a public void close interactable icon as well. And all these are going to do, they're going to get our interactable object and set it to true or false, respectively. So that's interactable icon.setActive, and to open it, we'll set it to true, and we'll copy this line of code down into our close and set it to false when we want to close it. Simple stuff. We're going to want one more method, and again, this is going to be a private void because we're not going to be accessing this outside of this script. And we'll just call this check interaction. So we want to call check interaction whenever we press our interact key. So we'll go ahead and do a really basic input check. So inside of our update, we'll check if input.getKeyDown, and we'll use keycode.e. So whenever we press E, we'll call our check interaction method. So for now, we'll leave our character controller. We have the basics set up. We'll go on to creating the scripts for our interactable objects. So first of all, we want to create a class called Interactable. Now this is going to be an inheritable class. So every one of our interactable objects will have this class. So this is where it's going to start getting a little bit more advanced, because Interactable is going to need to be an abstract class, because we're going to implement an abstract method. Now, very simply, what an abstract method is sort of a placeholder, and any class that inherits from Interactable will need to implement that method. So we'll throw in a public abstract void, and we'll call this interact. And the reason we want this is because every interactable object may have a different outcome. So in this, we're going to be opening and closing those bins, so that's just swapping a sprite in and out. In the next tutorial, that interact method will need to allow us to transport ourselves around the map when we're using a door. So we don't actually want to put any code inside of that method in this class. Another few things that we're going to want to do. We're going to want to add in some trigger enter and trigger exits. So that will be on trigger enter 2D and on trigger exit 2D. And all these are going to do, these are going to be responsible for opening and closing our interactable finger icon whenever we enter an interactable space. So we'll check if the collision, and we'll compare that tag, and if that tag is player, we'll get collision.getComponent, we'll get a character control, and we'll open the interactable icon. And then exactly the same when we leave, but this time we're going to close the interactable icon. Now, like I said before, every interactable object is going to need some form of collider. So we can make sure that anything that we inherit from Interactable with, we can make sure that that object does in fact have a 2D collider. And to do that, above the class declaration, we can use the require component attribute. And the component that we want is of type, so type of, and we'll pass in box collider 2D. And one final thing in this class is we want to make sure that this box collider is always set to isTrigger, because we're using our trigger commands and not our collision commands. So the way that we can do that, we can use the monoBehavior method reset. So that'll be private void reset, and inside of reset we can use getComponent box collider 2D, and we can set isTrigger equal to true. Now we can do this in reset because we know for a fact that our object is going to have a box collider. So that's this class complete. We can get rid of these two system namespaces, we won't be needing those, but now we have an inheritable interactable class. So let's put this to use. In the case of our bin, all we want to do is swap the sprite out. We want to open the bin and then close the bin. So we can go ahead and create a class that'll do just this. And we can call it openable. Now again, just like in Interactable, there's a component that we're definitely going to need, and that this time is the sprite renderer. And we need that because we're obviously going to be swapping in and out of sprites. So we can add in the require component type of sprite renderer. So now we know for a fact that we're always going to have a sprite renderer. Next, we're going to need two public sprites, and that's going to be for the open sprite and public sprite closed. We're also going to want to get a reference to the sprite renderer itself. So that'll be a private sprite renderer, we'll just call that SI. And we also want to keep a local copy of whether or not this object is open. So again, a private bool and we'll just call that isOpen. So in our start method, we can grab the sprite renderer, just like we always do with getComponent, and we'll get the sprite renderer, and then we'll set our sprite renderer sprite equal to our closed sprite that we've passed in. So now we want to make anything that's openable interactable. So we do that by, instead of inheriting from mono behavior, we'll inherit from interactable. And this will give us an error. And this is saying that we don't implement the abstract member interact, which is this abstract member right here. So we can go ahead and let Unity autofill this. All it does is puts a public override called exactly the same as the method name in the abstract class, and it'll put in some boilerplate code which will just throw a system error because we're not currently doing anything with it. So we can remove that error because we're going to fill this in now. And all we want to do if we interact with one of these openable objects is we'll check if we're already open. So we'll check isOpen. If we are, we want to close it. So we'll set sprite renderer dot sprite equal to our close sprite. Or else, if we're not open, so we're closed, we want to open it. So we'll do the exact opposite. Set the sprite renderer sprite equal to open. And then we want to toggle that isOpen boolean to whatever the opposite was. And again, that's this class complete. Get rid of any unused namespaces. So now that we can check for interactable objects, we can go back to our character controller class and we can start checking for interactions. So like I said at the start of the video, we're going to be using raycasting. Now we're not going to use the standard raycast line, we're going to be using something called box casting, which works exactly or similar to standard raycasting, but instead of putting out a line, it'll put a box, a 2D box, around our target object. And then it'll check for any colliders inside of that box and return the hit value for that. So we're going to want to take in an array of objects because we may be over the top of multiple objects that have colliders. So what we can do, we can set a raycast hit 2D and we'll make that an array and we'll call it hits. And we'll set that equal to physics2D dot boxcast all. Now boxcast all needs 4 parameters. The first being its origin point, so we want that to be our player's position, so we can set that to transform.position. We also want a vector2 of the size of our raycasted box. So I've gone ahead and up at the top here, I have a private vector2 and a box size, and I've set this box to be 0.1 wide by 1 tall. So that way, no matter where the object is, if it's on the ground or slightly above our player, we'll be able to capture it by having a 1 on the Y. And similarly, we only want it quite narrow into our player, so we're not finding objects that are way out of our reach. So we can put in, as our size, that box size vector2. Next, we need an angle in which this box is angled. But we don't want it to be, we just want it to be a standard box, so we'll put that in as 0. Next, we need the direction in which we want this box to be casting, so we'll use vector2 dot 0. Next, we want to make sure that we've actually got something in our hits array so we don't actually get an index out of range exception. So we'll check if hits.length is greater than 0. If it is, we've hit something and we can go over our hits array. So now we can do a for each loop, and we'll do for each raycast hit 2D, we'll call that RC in hits, and now we need to check if our object that we've hit is actually interactable. So the way that we could do this is we could check if RC dot transform dot get component interactable. So if our object has the component interactable, that'll return true and we'll go into our block of code inside the if statement. And then if it is, we can do exactly the same again, but this time we'll call our interact method because we know we're going to have one because we have interactable, we're forced to implement our interact abstract method, and in openable, that's right here, and that just toggles our sprites. So whenever we hit this, we're going to open and close whatever we want. And then just to make sure that we don't interact with every object, we can return out of that if statement. If you want to be able to interact with everything that you're currently in range of, leave that return statement out, and this will call interact on every interactable object. I just want to call it on the first one that we find. But instead of needing to do this on any of our interactable components, we can in fact use extension methods, and we can extend raycast hit 2D. So this isn't strictly necessary. This code will work as it is, but I'm going to make use out of some extension methods here. So we pop back over into Unity, we'll create one more script, and we'll call it extensions. We'll get rid of our start and update. We don't need to inherit from mono behavior, but for our extensions class, this does need to be static. Let's have a think about what we want. We want to extend raycast hit 2D, and we want to be able to get whether or not that object is interactable from it. So let's create a public static bool. We'll call this is interactable. And then to make this an extension method, what we need to do, we need to pass in this, and then the type that we want to extend. So that'll be raycast hit 2D, and we'll give it a name, hit. And all we want to do in this method is return whether or not hit.transform.getComponent interactable. And then we can also create one more extension method in here, and we'll just call this one interact. And again, we're going to be extending raycast hit 2D, but this time we don't want to return anything, so we'll put void, get rid of the return statement, and this time we'll just call interact on our object. So now if we pop back to the character controller, we can put in these extension methods by removing all of this, and we'll just check rc dot is interactable. So it does exactly the same, it just makes it look a little bit nicer. And then again here we can do rc dot interact. And I do go into extension methods in a lot more detail in one of my other tutorials, so make sure you go and check that out if you're a little bit confused as to what I did there. So now we have all of our scripts set up. It should just be a case of implementing them inside of our game. So we'll open up the game object that I have all my assets inside, and we'll find our two empty bins, these two right here. And as you can see, all they've got is a sprite renderer, which you'd expect for an in-game sprite. So we want these both to be openable. So we can drag and drop our openable script on. And as you can see, it's automatically generated a box collider for us. It's automatically set it to trigger, and it would have automatically given us a sprite renderer if we didn't already have one. So now all that's left is to populate our open and close sprites. So if we take a look, we'll get our exteriors, props. So we want bin closed in closed and bin open in open. And that should be it. We should be able to play our game now. We can see I can move around like I did before. Whenever I'm next to a bin that's interactable, I get my little interactable finger arrow. And if we press E while we're over it, we can see we swap our sprites out, and then they can toggle back as well. So now we could make any of our sprites interactable, as long as we had a varying sprite for that. So we could go ahead and create an alternate version of our fire hydrant that's leaking water, and whenever we interact with that, all we'd have to do is select our object, drag in our openable script, and drag in the two sprites for open and closed. So as you can see, this is extremely reusable and extremely easy to use once everything's in place. Now in the next video, what I'm going to do, I'm going to reuse this for our doors. and our doors are going to take us around the map into different houses, into different rooms, and we're going to be using the Interactable script. So if you're interested in that, make sure you go and check out that video as well, and I will see you again soon. If you've learned something today, then drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. You can also find us over on social media for more bite-sized Unity and C# tips. I've been Mike for Comp3 Interactive, and I'll see you again soon.